beautiful downtown Millheim, in the smack dab center of the Keystone State. This is Lou Bryson with Seen Through a Glass, the podcast that's mostly about food and drink in central Pennsylvania. Welcome to episode 66, The Wolf is Loose. As you may have heard, my new book is out. I've been traveling to show it off and do book signing events, and the second one of those was with my good friends at Stoll and Wolfe Distillery in Lidditz, PA. The Stoll in the name is the late, great Dick Stoll, a largely unsung master distiller who made some of the best bourbon in the modern age. And that's not just my opinion, it's widely held. In fact, my fellow whiskey writer Chuck Cowdery wrote a whole book about it, titled The Best Bourbon You'll Never Taste. Now, the Wolf in the name is Erik Wolfe, a young man who is, to use a somewhat worn-out term, passionate about whiskey making, rural Pennsylvania, rye, well, a lot of the same things I love. But Erik talks about these things as if he were singing an improvised song, and I recorded that free-flowing enthusiasm when I was at the distillery for the event. You know how these interviews go. I introduce the person, I ask them a question, they answer, I ask another question, we may do some follow-ups, and so on. Well, that's not how this went. I asked Erik one question, and he was off like a bloodhound chasing a scent. And you know, it was all so damned interesting that I just let him run. It's a long interview, longer than we usually go. It's almost an hour. So I'm going to keep the rest of this short. And after it's all done, I urge you to stick around to the end of the recording. The holidays are coming up, and it's a disruptive schedule for your Seen Through a Glass listening habits. But I've got it all figured out in a way I think you're really going to like. First, though, what I'm drinking today. What I'm drinking today is, appropriately, Stoll and Wolfe whiskey. I was going to say it's an unreleased whiskey, but a small number of bottles were released in early October. It's a whiskey made with heirloom rosin rye, which is special, but there's also malted rye in there, and that's rosin rye too. So that's an heirloom whiskey recipe made with heirloom rye. It's 4 years old, bottled at 107 proof. I tried this at the distillery, and it's quite different. Let's have a taste. Now, the first thing I noticed was, wow, a real, like a almost honeyed sweetness. Rye whiskey often presents as more herbal than the sweetness you're used to with bourbon. And this has a honeyed sweetness. There's also some fruity nuts, almost like juicy fruit gum, and just a hint of oak. Let's try it. Oh, yeah. That's what I remember from the distillery. There are notes almost like honey graham crackers here. A sweetness, but a grainy sweetness with a nice cookie cracker taste underneath. Oh, yeah. Yeah, and it really swells in the back of the mouth and in the finish. There's still heat there. There's still rye spice there. There's still some oak structure to it. But the sweetness is really something I'm not used to in rye whiskey in general, and especially in Stoll and Wolfe whiskey. I think this rosin rye malt has made a real difference. Now, does it make a difference that it's rosin rye malt, or is it just that it's rye malt? Because that's not a thing they usually have in their whiskey. But I have to say, no matter what it is, I hope they do it again, because there was only one barrel of this they made. I really hope they've got enough rosin and enough rosin malt that they can do more of it. Great whiskey. And of course, we're going to do your smack dab in the center, sponsored by the Happy Valley Adventure Bureau. Hey, you know, we talked about pizza a lot last episode. Why not more? There are pizza joints all over Center County, so let's try a few. We were pretty happy to find Brothers Pizza in Center Hall when we moved here. Not only do they have good pies, they also do a pretty good expanded Italian menu, including a really delicious antipasta salad. Now, if only Center Hall wasn't a dry town, hey, there's always Faccia Luna in State College, always mentioned in discussions about the top pizzas in the area, and rightly so. Faccia Luna also has a top-notch array of beer. I speak from experience, my friends. Believe it. Went in there and got Draft Chimay one time, a Belgian beer you often don't even see in bottles. And there it was, pouring freely. Do you like beer and pizza? Like a down and dirty tavern pizza, some real comfort food with a great cold draft? 15,000 students can't be wrong. Slip into Champs in downtown State College and relax with one of these beauties. The pies are hot. Go to happyvalley.com website, click on the Eats button, and then click through on pizza, subs, and sandwiches. Let's go get a slice. All right, then. Are you ready? I'm going to push the button here, and Erik's going to talk about how landrace ryes developed, why tobacco pushed out distilling in Lancaster County, how little rosin rye there was when this whole revival started, how hard stump pulling was, the struggles of pacifist Moravians in the American Revolution, colonial rum that was made with corn stalks, maybe, whiskey in liminal spaces, the Whiskey Rebellion and George Washington, the state of the craft distilling industry, and that's all before he really gets rolling. Buckle up, my friends. It's a wild ride. I'll see you on the other side. Hey, I'm here at Stoll & Wolfe Distillery with Erik Wolfe, the co-founder and distiller here. How are you doing?
Good, Lou. Thank you so much for taking the time to come out.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be here.
And also, your book launched, was it yesterday?
Yes.
So the second day of the book tour, we're honored that we get to be here and get to taste some people.
I got to be honest. The reason you're second instead of first is because I can drive home from here. You know,
and what do they say? Location. Right. So that's even for authors. Yes. It's fantastic. So, and for us, it's just so much fun to geek out with fellow whiskey nerds. I love it when people actually know what they're talking about. Yeah. And for us, it's one of those things where the more I learn about whiskey, the less sure I am about any aspect of it. And there's certain things where we had the chance to speak to a group of historians this past weekend, and I'm checking all of my notes and footnotes, and I just don't want to misspeak to anybody. Yeah. And the thing that fascinated them the most, despite all of the colonial history, was why is the whiskey white in some bottles and have color in the others. Right. And I think for a lot of people, it's so easy to forget. As we get more and more advanced in geeking out about whiskey, it becomes very easy to forget that there's some people who are just beginning that journey. Yep. And their questions are, when I'm well rested and not under something steaming or hot, really insightful, because at the end of the day, it does bring you back to in the ways that parenting that helps you learn more about yourself. Mm-hmm. You're like, oh wow, that is so true. That's something that before I began my whiskey journey, how would I have known that as well? Yeah. And then again, talking to them about the chemistry and the wood sugar, that didn't reassure them necessarily that was okay to drink. And then you bring up pancake syrup, and then they're like, okay, now we get it. Yeah. And then their question was about wood alcohol versus. So it's just interesting. Every group has their own questions. Yeah, so, if you just let them ask them. Yeah, that's instead of running by it. Well, and what was fascinating was we're so small, we had to break the group up into two separate groups. And whoever was running the group was like, you this way, you this way. It was very random, but the two groups couldn't have been more different. So fascinating how, again, from the same larger group, how it sort of takes on a life of its own. But as we were talking about before, just with the craft industry, there's just so much knowledge out there, and again, so much to be learned. Well, I think one of the things, and we're going way off track, but I don't give a damn. Yeah. One of the cool things about the whole craft distilling, just the numbers of people who are getting into it, a lot of the knowledge in the legacy distilling industry, if you will say, was empirical, and it was awesome. I mean, these guys had just been making whiskey, but now there's a whole bunch of other people who are out there making whiskey and finding stuff. Maybe they find different stuff. Maybe they find new stuff. Well, and to take it way further out, to bring it back in, I was watching a documentary, the Ken Burns documentary on Benjamin Franklin last night. Yeah. And they were saying that in some ways his lack of education was a benefit, because so much of what we're taught is what we don't need to know. But Franklin, by not knowing what he didn't need to know, felt compelled to learn so much more and had such a varied interest where if you weren't educated with the Seagram's manual, then there's so many things that to come out and look at. And the Seagram's manual is incredibly comprehensive. And the way that corporations can break down those things, we lack that standardization in training. We would love to have some documentation, but for them, I feel like as a craft distiller, some of the dogma that exists in some of the more larger scale things, we're crazy enough or naive enough to not know that you can't do that.
Yeah.
So then all of a sudden, and we're small enough that it's not going into a cistern with another run. It's not being commingled with. It's small enough that we've got a few barrels of it, and we're close enough to it that we can ideally look for those happy accidents. And that's something I know that we talked a lot about with Dick, where a lot of people wondered what the main difference was between when he left distilling and when he returned. Mm-hmm. And it's one of those instances where for him, three things actually, that anyone wanted to meet a distiller, why they cared about who made their whiskey, he could not fathom. He was thankful, but couldn't understand.
It's just work.
That's it. Also, the age on whiskey. Why would anyone drink a whiskey over 8 to 10 years old? Was he just and the
Jimmy Russell, same thing.
Yeah.
Literally the same thing.
And those guys just of that generation, the idea of a 16-year-old whiskey with the Hirsch was just. And they would get older barrels occasionally that were lost in the warehouse, and they'd kind of sheepishly blend them in and be like, "Oh, we're sorry about that. There was 14-year whiskey in there. We didn't want to, hopefully no one gets upset about that."
Right.
And the last part of it was just how close he was to the finished product. Where when he was doing the 1 barrel a day distillery, that was amazing. He was very close and working on pot stills, but that 1 barrel didn't get barreled on its own. It was being sent over and put in the cistern at the end of the day. And I guess occasionally they were barreled specifically on their own, but that was few and far between. And then they were blended in. They weren't bottled on their own.
Right.
So it's just fascinating to see with some of that how he learned and the influence, but again, the fact that he could taste the whiskey coming off the still and that those adjustments, whether it was with the deflegmator, with the steam, within minutes, you're able to taste and touch. So, so much of what we talk about here is, and I was reminded of it recently. I recently became an uncle for the first time, which was cool.
Yeah.
But as I was reminding my sister, and as we talk about all the time with antique production, when people talk about artisanal, when Wendy's uses the word artisanal, does it have any meaning anymore? It's very challenging. But to us, artisanal means that you're using your 5 senses in some way.
Okay.
And as basic as that sounds, as a parent, and this is where I was talking about with my niece, as I was saying to my sister, the first things you're going to teach her are take that out of your mouth. We found my sister with a screw in her mouth when she was like 6 months old. So she turned out okay.
Okay.
Debatably. Yeah, I mean, for the most part. But love you, Rachel. But take that out of your mouth. Don't touch that. Don't stare at that. You can't smell that in public. And again, those are the instincts that you need as a craft producer to be able to, when we had the opportunity to be working at Mount Vernon and the archaeologists are coming through, they're so dedicated and so respectful. And so for us to touch artifacts would not be good, but for them, trying to get them to touch the still as it's warming up and to feel the way the heat disperses and to even feel the pressure at the end of the worm and the way it's sort of breathing in the beginning and equalizing pressure, and to be able to smell that mash coming up and start on a stripping run, to be able to smell the distillate as you go through heads into, feel where the still is at, hear the water. That's the other one. Sorry, is it's impolite to listen in on other people's conversations. Right. But again, to listen at the distillery, you need to hear how things are flowing. How's that pump running? How's the still running? So it's amazing. So much of what we're doing is really returning to, in some ways, that childlike state where it's not impolite to touch, smell, taste, feel.
You have to.
Well, that's it. And then we're then the instrument that gets calibrated theoretically. Because I don't have a distiller Matic 3000 that runs things. It's, all right, well, it seems like this is the viscosity today. This is the flow rate. Now with the column, we do have something that measures how much is flowing in and how much is flowing out. And that's for basic safety, just so we don't plug the column. There's what they call on a column, the second column from the top is what they call an oh shit plate. Essentially being that if it goes above that, oh shit, we've got too much mash in there.
Oh, okay.
So,
Gotcha.
Yeah, exactly. It's very technical.
Yeah.
So that said, for us, it's a good way to make sure that float is working. Otherwise, it's, my dad and I, Aviana, our helper, Paul, who are going through listening and adjusting, and it's never the same twice. Theoretically, when you see the column, people are like, oh, well, you just dial that sucker in. And you do, in that, as long as the pressure doesn't change, the consistency of the mash doesn't change, the alcohol by volume of mash doesn't change, the water is evaporating properly because the dew point is the same on the condenser so never essentially is how it runs. And for us, we're only feeding mash into the column for 8 hours at the most, where as any sane column operator would tell you in Kentucky, once you get it up and running, you just keep feeding her and feeding her, and it'll be good and it'll become ever more perfect. So just as they would be getting into like that real sweet spot, we're going to shut it down and clean it and start all over again. So for us, it's one of those things where sane people don't create a mess every day to clean it up and then redo it again. But we're what do they say? A strong back and a weak mind is helpful. So, yeah.
I want to talk about what we're tasting here, what you poured me.
Yeah.
You poured me a rye whiskey that is made with rosin rye with malted rosin rye.
It is. So this is a very exciting whiskey for us on a few levels. One, in that it was produced while Dick was. I'm sorry. Yes, it was produced while Dick was still alive.
Wow.
Excuse me.
Yeah, it's a
and it. Sorry, I'm going to try not to get emotional there. It is our first 100% rye as well. So most of our ryes are 60, 30, 10. So 60% rye, 30% corn, and 10% malt.
Okay.
For us, this was Laura. Laura had brought, from Delaware Valley Fields Foundation, had brought us the rosin initially and came to us and said, would you be interested if I brought you rosin malt to use in the... So again, I don't think anyone says no to that. For us, it's been such an interesting whiskey in that, and the hardest thing with this whiskey is that, as I said to you before we poured it, love it or hate it, there's one barrel of it.
Yeah.
It wasn't even a full 53. We had about 42 gallons of it. And now, for us, the trajectory of this rye, I upset some people with this rye because I kept promising we were going to release it at a younger age because I thought it would be worthy of doing so. What I found, and I could be wrong, but as we were pulling it, it would go through highs and lows. But I think...
Oh, as it aged?
As it aged, for sure. And I think with a lot of aging, if you look at it over a long enough period of time, the curve normalizes, and it up to that 10, maybe 11-year mark, you get some great nuance, and then it changes a little bit after that, quite a bit. But with the less modified malt that's in here with the rye, it would get these weird vegetal moments. And we had that with another rye that we did that we actually ran prior to this, but we still haven't released, and it's 100% pale rye malt. When we first, it was expensive to distill, which is why we only did it.
The entire mash.
The entire mash was.
Okay.
So with that, when we first distilled it, and I always joke that my job is to come up with really fun, exciting, weird ideas, and my wife and business partner Aviana's job is to tell me why they're not going to work. But it also keeps us in business and helps keep us married, so that's good. When she agrees to something, I know there's something to it. So with this one, she agreed to it, and when it was in the mash tun, it smelled like graham crackers and honey, and we were so excited. But then when it came out, it had this. It smelled like V8.
Oh my!
Or the tops of tomato plants, sort of like that lycopene vegetal sort of. So it's taken years for that to come out, but I think what's left is fairly unique.
Yeah. This is wow.
And people often ask us with rosin what we think the difference is, and up until recently, I've qualified it because we haven't had enough rosin years, barrels, or finishes to be able to see what it can do. Mm-hmm. So for us to finally have some that are 4 or 5 years old, have multiple barrels of other releases that are 4 and 5 years old, because prior to that, we'd have 1 barrel per year. How do
because you didn't have enough grain.
Well, that's it.
Yeah.
And was that the best barrel or the worst barrel of rosin rye for that year that we produced?
Sure.
It was 100% of them. So it was the best and the worst. So for us, now that we're able to do many more barrels, we're able to do about 30 to 35 rosin barrels a year.
Much? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're actually able to grow the grain on a farm about 1.5 miles from here that's been in the family since 1741.
Right. Yeah.
So with the rosin will self-hybridize in the fields. Like I know Bob McDonald is growing rye out in the western part of the state.
Yeah.
That rye over time, as it self-hybridizes in the field with the terroir of the field, will become...
This is the landrace thing?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It'll become its own unique variation. And the hardest thing with that is we've had people say, well, you should really pick the biggest heads of the rye and set those aside for seed. But are the biggest ones the most flavorful ones?
No, they're just the highest yield.
That's exactly it. And often yield and flavor are inversely related.
Yeah.
So for us, then it becomes, well, do you then look at stalk stability or node length? Or there's so many different little things you can look at. To us, we don't really know, so we haven't really selected seed. The only thing that we do know is happening is the seed that doesn't fall over as easy, lodges, is more likely to make it into the combine. So over time, theoretically, there will be some selection of that. But even in the equipment that's used, even if you're trying to keep all of the variety in the field, the equipment you're using will, over time, in some ways dictate. Because if you can't pull that stuff that's stuck on the ground,
it ain't going to make it.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
So, and it's funny because people talk about some of those varietals and it's never been hybridized. It's never... Since human beings have walked past a field, a tree, a whatever, and said, ooh, that one looks bigger, shinier, brighter, is less covered by bugs, there was some selection that was happening. So I think since you can't avoid it, you might as well embrace it. So for us, it'll be interesting to see. But for farmers, we guarantee that we'll pay... we pay more than the going rate just because it's family and we feel it's the right thing to do. But for farmers, it's just so hard for them to generally do what they do, in that this year they issued a report saying that rye harvests were generally down, and for the horrible reason that it rained really hard when they were in the pollinate stage.
Yeah.
So as if things aren't hard enough, as if the labor, as if the cost of land, as if the cost of the crops isn't low enough to have those natural, and a lot of people are like, well, you know what? They have crop insurance, so it works out. The problem with crop insurance is it's much like homeowners insurance, or it's much like there's a deductible, you have to prove it. And by the time the farmers pay for enough crop insurance, they'd have to have a crop failure every 10 years or so, which thank goodness they don't in our area, but it's just one more thing they have to contend with. Right. So for us with the rye, that's something these are 3 of the months of the year that I don't have to worry about what's happening with the weather because I don't have rye planted yet. In another couple weeks, I will. Mm-hmm. And then I obsessively, as my poor wife will attest, am checking the weather just because we need a good hard frost. But then we also need some rain, but not too much rain. Because if we get just enough rain, it'll force it to put out good roots and create stability. But if you get not enough rain, obviously not good, and too much rain, then the seeds can rot in the field. So again, it's this Goldilocks zone that you're looking for. And it turns out there's a reason normal people don't grow heritage grains and why they've been in many ways removed from the cycle. And it's only in industries like distilling where potentially there are higher margins to make that work. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, how do you justify a loaf of bread costing 5 times more?
Margin in baking is completely different.
It's so hard. And in brewing as well, just because of the sheer volume of how that works. And with small grains for them, you're not getting nearly the same yield. So it's very interesting to see. But yeah.
Yeah, your aging costs are so high they kind of minimalize the material costs.
That's it. Yeah, for us, it's one of those things. We're growing. It was 7.5 acres, and I believe our yield was around 40 to 45 bushels an acre. So hopefully nobody checks my math, but I think we ended up with about 18,000 pounds of rye. So for us, we're using 1,200 pounds per batch right now. So, and it's interesting because we get folks that, to some people, the fact that we're using corn in our rye makes their blood boil in a way that I don't fully understand, but is fascinating. And we've had people say that they really like our rye, but they're sorry we've cheapened it with the corn.
Wow.
And to us, it's fascinating where I think our rye represents a specific type of rye. And as we tell people all the time, love it or hate it. And with rye, a lot of these people, it's a sample size of one. They haven't had another rye, or they've had a rye. Mm-hmm. And as we tell them, 2% difference could be a bourbon to some ryes.
Yes.
For the Kentucky style rye.
Yep.
And again, those can be phenomenal. That's not this style of rye. So whether you love it or hate it, and we'll get people sitting next to each other that come in together and say, oh, that spice with a little bit of sweetness. And they're like, oh, the spice. Yeah. I hate that. And then the person next to them's like, what are you talking about? That's what made it for us. And again, it's to some people, Coke versus Pepsi but I think for a lot of folks, the bourbon still dominates. And if your perception of whiskey is coming from the bourbon world, I think potentially that spice could be off-putting for people. But trying to get them to understand that the corn, in Dick's mind, was a way to make the rye spicier. And then it's sort of interesting talking to people about that, because then we can get into baking. And I think once we're into baking, people are a lot more comfortable. We're in their kitchen, literally in their kitchen. Yeah. So they feel somewhat disarmed. They have a lot more experience. And talk to them about baking and those ratios. When you make a chocolate cake, there's only so much cocoa your palate can register.
Yeah.
And despite what some brewers seem to operate under, there's only so many IBUs
you can
actually perceive.
Perceive, exactly.
So that said, with the sweetness of the corn, it's almost like adding coffee to a chocolate cake. The coffee actually gives you a counterpoint to the cocoa.
Great comparison.
Yeah, so then the so much of tasting works with counterpoint or a reference to other things. Mm-hmm. So with that, it really does help, we think, round out the flavor profile. And also in Eastern Pennsylvania, we have so much corn. I mean, you couldn't swing a Yoder without hitting a cornfield. You know what I mean? And it's, as a fellow, Lancaster County native, it's all love to Yoders. I guarantee we're both related to many of them. I could have said a Kaufman. A shank. But that said, there's so much corn in our area that it really does represent. And the amazing thing with Lancaster County, most productive non-irrigated farmland in the whole country. So Florida produces more than California, both with the aid of irrigation. So in this area, it's amazing how much whiskey was produced from that corn, and yet how little the average Lancastrian or local person really is even necessarily aware of that heritage. Mostly because of prohibition and tobacco. Just sort of
tobacco, right.
supplanting it. Because there's so many interesting records where it's like, you know what, we're very pious, and our religious leader told us that this is not only bad for us, bad for the community. We want to be upstanding citizens. So we're going to find a cash crop that has no religious, moral, social qualms. And that was tobacco. Yeah, it's fascinating. And now in Lancaster County, there's a move to cannabis. So
that's right. I've been reading about that.
So all these products that are at one time offensive, and it's just fascinating with the distilling history, and that so many people came to discover or admit they had relatives that distilled. But in some ways, it's still like saying, well, my grandmother had a few pot plants in the basement. We're not quite there yet.
Yeah.
And if we were on the West Coast, probably. In Lancaster County, not quite so much. Yeah. We may never get there in Lancaster County, but that's okay. So it's just fascinating, though, how these things go in cycles. And to us, that's so much of what we really try to talk to people about with the whiskey, is that this was the frontier at one time, which is somewhat laughable today. But if you get on the Pennsylvania Turnpike and you go west, after Mechanicsburg and Carlisle, it
drops off a lot.
It really does. And it's beautiful.
On 30, you get west of Chambersburg and there's nothing.
That's it. So I can't imagine hundreds of years ago what that would have been like, especially when traveling at night or seasonally, it was almost impossible. So in this area, there were so many streams and so many mills. And we joke that in Lancaster County, oftentimes the only time you can't leave your car unlocked is August, because your neighbors will open up your back seat and put tomatoes in there. Or zucchini, or all the other produce that we can't get rid of. And that's how we often describe it here locally is, do you grow tomatoes? And the answer is always yes. Just, and like, not, of course I do. Where you're like, exactly, thank you for making my point. Now, can you give those tomatoes away? No. Everyone else has them.
No, that's why you can them, because otherwise you'd make enemies.
And that's rye. In Lancaster County, there was so much of it, and our 9-time, 10-time great grandfather that first got the farm, to own something for the first time, to come here and actually have the opportunity to rise or fall, was crazy by your own merit and a lot of luck. But that said, to come and pull stumps. I was talking to the group this weekend. I was like, has anyone had a stump pulled recently? They're like, oh, yeah, it's really expensive. I was like, because it's a lot of labor.
Yes.
Imagine doing that with
hand tools.
I mean, it's a horsepower. If you had a horse to pull a little bit. So if you were blessed enough to get that land, get a harvest in, be able to get it out of the field, you are not going to let that go to waste. And we're talking about, and I say this as my relatives, incredibly frugal people. These are the people that wrote Hansel and Gretel. These are the people that when children took candy, they got pushed into an oven, because we wanted to teach them as a society, you don't tarry, you don't mess around, you work. And in Lancaster County to this day, one of the kindest things you could say to somebody is they're a hard worker. Are they, do they set things on fire? They whatever. I don't really know. They just work hard. So we don't really care. The rest of it's fine by us. So with so many of those people then, and coming up on the 250th anniversary of so much of it, if somebody said to you, hey, Lou, for the first time, if you have a good harvest, you don't have to give it to the feudal lord or the parish priest or whoever else. It's yours. Your children will have enough to eat this winter. But here's the thing. The people that were kind enough to allow you to do all that, screw them. They're charging us a 3% tax in the cities that really has nothing to do with you here rurally. Because you're in a barter economy. but we really need you to take up arms against these people. And if we lose, you're probably not going to have anything. So the town just north of us changed the little hamlet just north of Lidditz, where the family farm is, changed their name to Lexington to show that they were basically
rebellious.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, which must have been really scary for these people. And with that, it's fascinating because the local Moravian congregation just a few years ago found a broadside, and Franklin was so amazing. He said to the local community, because they were pacifists and they were conscientious objectors, and he's like, look, guys, we're going to win. And when we do, I would hate, and this is me just looking out for you guys, I would hate for your new countrymen to think you didn't pull your weight, or worse yet, that you were British sympathizers. So here's the thing, we're really going to need you guys to, so it was fascinating. They ultimately reluctantly agreed to host a hospital here. Unfortunately, Camp Fever broke out, and there was devastating, unfortunately. Yeah. But it was fascinating in the local Moravian community. It was men who were serving, basically had to get excommunicated to serve, and then could come back to the church afterwards.
Wow!
But to have to give up ownership of anything. And then it's like, okay, well, you know what? I'm fighting for a cause larger than myself. Well, here's the thing. Your mortal soul may be in limbo to do this. Okay, cool. So, but we've got a leader, right? Not yet. Yeah. Not really. No. We've got enough bullets. No. Uniforms. Not at all. Are the people we fighting advanced? They're the most advanced military in the world right now. They're like, I'm not hearing anything that's making me... But they did. Where if that's not, talking to my daughter about all this stuff, it's like I get goosebumps. Where who does that? Who's not? I mean, other than a patriot, the thought of America as we know it didn't exist.
Right.
So you just came somewhere. You just were able to get ahead for a generation, and now you're putting that all on the line. So for us, with some of the whiskeys that we're doing in the colonial rye, with a rum variation that we're doing, what we're hoping to do is not only celebrate that upcoming 250th anniversary, but I don't know if you're familiar with the term liminal spaces or liminal moments. Basically the idea that you're straddling two disparate eras or places or ethos. So for us, when we talk to people about history quite a bit, I know in people's minds, the average person sees history in black and white. There are no color photographs of the revolution.
Right. If there were, it would make so much difference.
It really would. And it's such a challenge sometimes to get people to connect across centuries to people who dress differently than we do, who lived in a very different yet very similar world to the one we do. But once you start to feel those commonalities, you really can appreciate the sacrifice. You can appreciate so many of those lessons that they were trying to pass on. But with that, we don't even try to go that far. We're just trying to get them to taste something. And as we talk about so often in this world, smell and taste are so powerful. And if we can create a modern sense memory that creates that liminal moment and connects you to centuries in the past, it's the beginning of a shared commonality, or it's the beginning of some shared ground with these people. And to us, it's the one way we can start to bridge past and present and get folks to think about that. And then it becomes, well, why is the whiskey white? Well, how did they actually age whiskey back then? Was whiskey aged back then? And then it brings up all these fascinating conversations of, when did the technology change? So where? When? At which spot? Why?
Yeah.
And I talk to my dad about that all the time. When you're distilling, you have a lot of time to think about ways to A, improve the process, or B, what people did before you and how you got there. And as I say to him all the time, if I said to you, hey, Dad, we've got this wood-fired distillery and it's great, and Grandpap and his pap and, generations, this is how we've done it. We're going to go to steam now. Who in their right mind brings live steam into an enclosed space
alcohol vapor
through pipes to alcohol vapor. It sounds like a terrible idea, but also so does in nature. Animals don't go to the bathroom where they live. So the first person to talk about indoor plumbing, I always thought was probably like Champion. Like, yeah, that's such a great idea. But I guarantee you the initial reaction was your grandfather.
In the house? Ew.
That's disgusting.
Yeah.
No one does that. We do that outside. Animals don't do that so it's just fascinating how with some of these things, again, it's fits and starts, but with the pot distillation, with the column distillation, we have in the local historical society a patent for a still that was applied for. Of course, the patent was late in being applied for. There was a fire at the patent office, which was these horrible historical coincidences that seem to conspire against certain people. But he essentially created a mid-step between the 3-chamber and the column, which I'm sure there were many of those mid-steps, but with so much of it, again, as you said, where, why, what was the impetus, how much budget did they have? So for us, it gives us a really exciting opportunity to talk about how so much of PA whiskey history parallels the growth of the country in some ways. You have colonization, then you have the Whiskey Rebellion, where there's an amazing quote at the Mount Vernon Museum, and it says about putting your hand in another man's purse is the same as directly stealing. A quote from Washington, which is a fantastic quote to inspire revolution. It becomes a bit awkward when you then need to finance that revolution by the means which you've denounced previously. But hey, they wanted to make you a king again anyway, so, who's splitting hairs here? So that said, then all of a sudden Washington kind of has to set the tone with this first rebellion of, are we going to go scorched earth? No, these are our countrymen, which is a huge...
Yeah.
I mean, and again, talk about someone who is an amazing leader where he didn't have to flex, as the kids say.
No.
Just enough to make his point. And then
I was literally just talking about this 2 days ago. The man for the time.
Oh, man. We're so blessed that he was the person to come along at that time and had the foresight and the...
And humility.
Oh, man, really, just such a... And somebody who was not overly educated. I mean, not necessarily undereducated.
I mean, for the time, yeah.
But I mean, he was working at quite a young age, and I think he had a lot of experience that educated him. And I think if you're the right type of person, you could do almost anything and come away with it with a deeper understanding of the world and humanity, if you're truly willing to look at it from the right spots. But what an amazing individual, and just the physicality of that time to go from New York to Philadelphia to DC to Alexandria. And the fascinating thing is, as a rye whiskey producer himself, it gives us another opportunity to talk to people about his production of rye whiskey and the fact that at that time it wouldn't have been sold as George Washington's rye whiskey. It wouldn't have had his face on it. It wouldn't have had it was a working man's drink. Washington himself was not drinking that. He was drinking brandy. He was drinking Madeira. He was drinking the things that the British aristocracy, for the most part, drank, which for us then brings about an interesting subject with our colonial-inspired rum. So I've learned never to say never, in that when we first opened, people asked if we would make a rum. And I, of course, never. No Pennsylvania connection to rum. That said, I've had amazing rums from Pennsylvania that have blown me away. But the one part that we found historically, and working with Alan Bishop and Paul Menta, as we were just talking about with technology, same thing with human taste and the desire for products. So people talk about rum and how we switched from rum to whiskey. And people are, when did that happen? Where? How much money did you have? How much did you... But in general, we started to switch over as rum became harder to import.
Because of the war.
That's exactly it. And then also even building anti-British sentiment where it's like, you know what, culturally, we're going to get away from the things they drank. We're going to drink our own spirits. So what's fascinating is none of those things happen in a binary fashion. It's not like one day we're drinking one thing, the next it all switches over. So in an attempt to keep making a rum-like product, what they were doing was taking unripened corn stalks and they were mixing that with some grain, mixing it occasionally with some fruit, and basically trying to create this
rum-like substance.
That's exactly it.
Wow.
Now, the craziest thing, and there might be chemists out there, I'm sure Todd Leopold could illuminate this much more than I can, but in my rudimentary understanding of it, they were not as far away as we might think from making something interesting, in that if you could change the pH so that you could invert some of the sugars in the corn, unripened corn, you could actually coax almost a corn syrup out of there. It's not a high fructose corn syrup.
We're talking about stalks.
About stalks of corn, yeah.
Wow.
And it would have never been something that I would even have believed until last year when we had that really hot and dry summer. And my wife is from Brooklyn originally, so when we go to the local farm stand in Lancaster County, everyone's got their own favorite. I was trying to explain that to a visitor the other day. But the way that you know that my wife is not from Lancaster County when she goes to the farm stand is that she puts her corn in stalk first into the bag, which I feel like my cousin Vinny right now, as any self-respecting Eastern Pennsylvania or Pennsylvanian will tell you, you put the tassel side in first if you don't chuck it at the...
Also true.
That said, shucking the corn, it was so sticky that my hands were just... So it is interesting.
There's something there.
There is, yeah. And I think really the problem with it is it's very inefficient. With those stalks, you're much better off feeding them to livestock, and you're much better off letting the corn mature and using that to distill than the stalks. But what was fascinating is...
I just saw a load of silage go by on the road today. Yeah,
no,
chopped up stalks.
It's fascinating how much of that stuff... I know with the heritage varietals of the straw, it's fascinating how... And that's straw, not hay, right? Okay, just clarifying to make sure that So it's longer than the average straw. So it's great for bedding for animals.
Okay.
So it's fascinating the different downstream uses of some of these things. And actually in the area, there's hay auctions and straw auctions as well. But with this colonial rum variant that we made, it was just fascinating to see a product that we feel like represents a flavor that a lot of folks hadn't had a chance to try in a while. Now, to most folks who try it, there's probably going to be a reason why it wasn't continued to be produced. They're going to say that it isn't barrel aged. We have some that is barrel aging right now, but the white, and to us, the only way to truly appreciate what's happening in the barrel is to have people try some of the white. Otherwise, what is your Rosetta Stone?
Yes.
So with so much of the whiskey that we are producing, we're not only trying to get people to understand what's happening in the fermenter and the still, but also as they're experiencing that rye, what's happening from a flavor perspective, and then how are those flavors being informed by the fermentation and the distillation as well, just so that there's some knowledge of what rye can be as one data point. There needs to be, they need to try many more Pennsylvania ryes to understand what they can be, but it at least allows them to have something to compare and contrast to. And with the white spirits, it's fascinating because we'll get folks that have never seen a white spirit, and their first inclination, and I totally understand why, when people see white spirit, the first thing they say is, oh, moonshine. And God bless Amanda Bryan. She's amazing. And Moonshiners is a fascinating show. Certainly has much more reach than we do. But it's, as we say to them, we have so much respect for the moonshining world. We're not brave enough to do it illicitly. And we have to do it with like drains in it. Sometimes I wish I was in the woods and could just hose down that way. With spills happen, you're like, oh, why are we inside doing this? But as we explain to them, it's it's not made in that fashion. It's actually a white whiskey, and trying to understand that it's almost like a schnapps made from whiskey, and that what you're tasting is 100% from the grain.
I mean, a lot of times I think it's almost like a Blanco tequila.
And that's where we find people love. So we do, we call it a Riegerita.
Okay.
And that funkiness
Yes.
that's in there is, and I think some of it it stands up nicely to the sugar and the lime.
Mm-hmm.
And for a lot of people, that mezcal sort of añejo, it gives them that reference point. So for us, we love for people to be able to try white and try through, just in that, even if they leave here and they don't buy a bottle or they don't come away saying that rye is for them, they're at least understanding a little bit more about rye. And as a counter to bourbon is amazing and beautiful. It's just very different than rye. So just trying to get them to understand the inherent differences, and then also letting them know that for us, our oldest release so far, I think, has been 6 years. So there's so much more to explore there. When people, what does Rosen taste like in 8 years? I have no idea. And the hardest thing for us up until now, again, is in a 4 or 5 year Rosen, I have such limited data points, but what we feel like we can say at this point is it does have more oil. It has a little bit more spice. It does have, which in some ways, we're very blessed with Rosen. There were so many people working on it before us. We came into it after so many people had done great stuff. But we invested a lot in doing Rosen as well. And if it was terrible, then what? And that's also something that craft producers can do in a way out of naivete and out of a need in some ways to differentiate yourself, is try things that don't make sense on paper. Normal people, especially people that wear ties or understand how to work calculators or do math, look at these things and go, why? And will people pay that much more for it over time?
Right.
And the answer is probably not. But for a small company like us, that's not, we need to make money to stay in business, but it's not, it's a little bit more labor of love and quirky enough.
You're taking such a huge risk to begin with.
Yeah.
Roll it again.
That's it. But yeah, that's, and for us, part of what we try to do when we talk about those liminal spaces is continue to have that ethos of 1 foot firmly in the past that is the Dick Stoll, Charles Everett Bean legacy. But we're at an interesting point in the industry where it's not about the fun, quirky, let me just come up with something new and try that and everyone's going to like it anyway, so it doesn't matter, and it's a feeding frenzy, and we're in the stick to your knitting, not nearly as fun, but a lot more disciplined, a lot more focused, a lot more blending of older product available, a lot more. So for us, trying to figure out products like the Colonial Rye, the Colonial Rum, the Rosen variations, some corn whiskey, things that enable us to sort of flex our creative muscles, but do so in a way that if Dick walked through the door tomorrow, Dick, we always joke, his expression was, "What the hell?" That if he walked through the door, he wouldn't say, "What the hell?" He'd be like, "Yeah, of course that's what you're doing." It's that would be the next logical step to do. So I think for us, it makes it fun and allows us to sort of explore new stuff. But so much of where we're at as an industry and as a producer is really, these are leaner times than at least when we started the distillery. And I think for a lot of people when they started, and it's the kind of thing for us where we're very excited about what the future holds. I think as unfortunate as it is that some incredibly talented and great distilleries have gone by the wayside, some that really have surprised so many of us, where amongst other distillers, you're like, holy shit, I can't believe that these people, if it were a merit-based thing, those would be the people who would be working.
Right.
So that said, for us, but I think ultimately there's, like any industry as it matures, we need that strongest sort of survive. Not strongest, but
No, but
there has to be some thinning. Unfortunately, just consumers are inundated with so many different brands. And we offer a sourced line, our Kindred Spirits line, only because some people will not drink a whiskey under 4 years
Right.
old, which no problem. We're happy to source and blend to your liking. But man, there's so many distilleries doing the same whiskey from the same places with a different label, and that's okay too. But how long can that happen before ultimately consumers say, I don't know what any of it means, and I throw up my hands, and it all seems like too much for me. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out over time. I don't know what you're.
I mean, I'm looking at, it's the same kind of thing I'm hearing.
Yeah.
That this is, I don't want to necessarily say contraction, but but I think you're right. It's a healthy thing.
Yeah.
And in the long run, it's not healthy for individuals, but it's healthy for the category.
Yeah. And I think to your point too, that's such an interesting word, the contraction. And I think that's exactly what it is. What we've been debating internally and with other distillers is the industry is still up so much from where it was.
Yes.
That it's almost like saying that an Olympic athlete is now not competing in the top 5 in the world. Are they washed up? No, but relative to the performance that they could exhibit before, but that was unrealistic and unsustainable, and nobody doesn't get older.
We've been racing as fast as we can go. We need a breath.
That's it.
Yeah.
So I think it'll be fascinating to see how that changes things, and also that the art of blending will really, I think, be able to shine in this era. And we just didn't really require that. And for some reason, sourcing and blending, not for some reason, I think people in a quest for transparency in some ways vilified some of the folks that they saw, rightly or wrongly, as maybe obscuring some of those brand stories, where it's just fascinating to see folks judging things on backstory as much as what's in the glass. Where I always encourage, when I'm tasting with friends, to put in one of the same whiskeys twice, just to keep us all honest. Because if you can't identify that one with the other one, that it's in there twice, and there are times where I don't, then maybe what we're saying is we should take with a little grain of salt, and that's okay too.
Yes.
I think it's the body is a very unreliable narrator in some ways with some of those, and just the smell of the room we're in, our hydration level. I tell people all the time about smelling the shoulder, which I got from you, and initially they look at you like you're crazy, but when you explain to them that your body is set up as a defense mechanism, and if you can't normalize the smell of yourself, how does that work? You only smell your own smells, and then it's worthless as a defense mechanism. So again, just very interesting in sort of taking these things off the shelf and democratizing them, which I think also will continue to happen as the industry matures, because there's only so much room for snobbery.
Preciousness.
That's it. As fellow geeks, it's like, look, I appreciate the crotch shots in the groups of these amazing bottles that few people taste and are almost more like trophies than they are experience.
With the contraction, I'm hoping that may fall by the wayside.
And it'll be interesting to see where, and much like Dick Stoll said initially, where I don't know why anyone wants to meet the person who makes the whiskey. You wonder, as that continues, will people continue to? I think whiskey tourism is here to stay. I think the desire to meet makers of all things is, and for some reason, distilling thank God people don't realize what we actually do on a daily basis, because it is the least sexy as a whole. Transmuting grain to alcohol, very sexy.
Sure.
The minutia of actually doing that is, I don't think I have a pair of work pants that aren't stained, ripped, scorched. I mean, just, and the sad thing is, I love that aspect of it. It's a twisted love, but
sure.
We always tell people, and it's died off recently, but we used to get about one person a week coming through talking about opening a distillery. And I would always ask them if they enjoy being wet the majority of their waking hours. And if they don't, being hot and wet, cold and wet, tired and wet, hungry and wet, distilling might not be for you. Are you okay with killing people for money? Because you may have easier time fundraising through all of it. But for us, truly a labor of love. But again, thank God people don't realize that the majority of my existence is taking liquid, whether it be water or alcohol, and moving it from one container to another.
And then cleaning the first container.
And then doing it all again the next day.
Yeah.
So it's, and truly, I always joke, I work with my wife, who's my business partner, and she is truly our boss. But the boss to both of us is this single-celled organism that it doesn't matter if we just sat down to eat, if the yeast kicked off late or the temperature or the... Gotta go do that. And it's... we joke the term distillery widow just because she loses me to the distillery quite often. But truly, those yeast... And then you'll get questions on tours. Well, is a 3-day fermentation better or a 5-day fermentation?
A complete fermentation is better.
That's exactly it. And also some of them... will go longer with it. It also depends where you are in the grain bin, because some of the finer grain will filter down.
Okay.
And then you have, so it's just fascinating.
Wow.
It's when it was interesting, I had the chance on the tour at Yingling to speak to one of the brewers and ask, I was like, do you hit the exact gravity every time? And he's like, eventually, yes. He's like, but again, I wanted to see if he was going to be honest.
Yeah.
And I think that's so much of it too, is in speaking with other distillers, if you haven't had a fermenter overflow, you haven't overfilled a tank, you're lying.
I've actually been hit by an overflowing fermenter at Woodford.
It
happens.
It really does. And it's the kind of thing where what else can you do but laugh?
Yeah.
Take a deep breath and go clean it up. I mean, it's just, but it is very, speaking with Alan Bishop about this the other week, it's interesting societally that the term humility can have a negative connotation to it. Like, oh, that taught him some humility. Where any pursuit, any craft worth dedicating your life to, how can you become an expert if it doesn't humble you repeatedly? How could you truly respect it? Where I think, I don't know, we were talking earlier about playing guitar, and I see certain people that play guitar, and it comes so easily to them. I'm not one of those people. But they don't appreciate their level of skill nearly as much as I appreciate their level of skill.
Because it was easy for them.
That's it. It just happened where it's just fascinating with the human nature of that stuff, where I think intellectually you can acknowledge that other people really respect it, but you're like, that wasn't so hard. It's so interesting though.
Yeah. I'm sorry, we got to wrap up.
No, please. This was awesome.
Oh my God, this was so much fun.
Thank you for taking the time.
Yeah.
And I wish you all the success on
Thank
your
you.
book tour.
Thank you. And this whiskey is, I'm crying that there's one barrel of it.
Oh man,
that's really good.
Thank you so much.
It is also exceptional in that it is quite different.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Well, it's we're glad that it's aging out well, and we will very much lament the last drop of it being bottled.
Yeah.
So,
wow. Okay.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers, Erik.
Oh man, this is great. Sorry that it went off topic.
It did not go off topic at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, that was something. You still with me? All right. Let's talk about that event I did in Baltimore at the end of September, because there's a State College connection and I had a really good meal. The event was at Sisu, that's Sisu. The new bottle bar opened recently by people familiar to State College folks. Chris Peters and Kate Houghton were doing a great job at the Hotel State College properties. Kate was running the corner room, and Chris was the overall beverage manager, bringing in some awesome wines and spirits. But they wanted their own place, and Sisu is, wow, it's their own place. Sisu is in a row house in a block just on the edge of Baltimore's Little Italy neighborhood. Chris and Kate wanted it to be part of the neighborhood, and they worked with the folks on the block to make it fit in. And it really looked like they've succeeded. The event was on a Sunday afternoon when they're usually closed, but the word spread and it was rocking by the time I left. I can't even claim they were there for me. They were there because Sisu was open. I mean, I did do pretty well on book sales, but still. So what's the draw? What's special? Well, first, their license lets them do an on and off-premise sale of full bottles. And that's a draw, given their excellent selection of wines. They also have the same carefully chosen spirits that have become a Chris Peters hallmark wherever he goes. I used to go to a Chris Peters managed place down in the Philly burbs, Teresa's next door, and that was great too. And of course, great draft beer, that's a draw for me for sure. But the design of the place, wow, so many cool touches. I suspect I'll be noticing new things on the next 3 visits. Now, there's not a lot of food. There is a great selection of tinned fish for snacks, but I wanted something more substantial, so I asked Kate, Little Italy's right up the block. What's good? She knows me. I wasn't looking for white linen, so she sent me to Benny's on High Street, the best balls on the block. Who might argue? I ordered the meatballs on polenta, which came in a bowl with plenty of delicious Sunday sauce, chunks of focaccia for mopping up, a dollop of cool, creamy, fresh ricotta, and yes, 4 big, delicious meatballs. The balls were great. Texture was not wet or dry, but solidly meaty and juicy. I mopped up every last bit of that sauce, too. We used to go down to Baltimore fairly often for dinner and for fun, and Little Italy was often the destination. I heartily recommend you join me in making that an occasional treat. Hey, I also heartily recommend that you get your whiskey-loving friends a copy of American Whiskey Masterclass for Christmas. The book's selling well and getting good reviews online, and I sold lots of them on my Midwest tour last week. I'm at Iron City Brewing this Saturday and Liberty Pole Spirits on Sunday. Check their Facebook pages for details. Come out and get a book. Get 2. That's the show. My thanks to Erik Wolfe for the interview and to Aviana Ponzi Wolfe for hosting a great event that night. If you visit Stoll & Wolfe, they have signed copies of the new book for sale. Pick some up for Christmas presents. As always, you can find pictures for this episode on Instagram at Stag Podcast and on Facebook at Seen Through a Glass. If you're listening to the show on the radio at WSOV, there are over 60 more episodes to enjoy at Spotify or Apple Podcast, Podbean, or any of the major podcast sources. Now, I was not surprised to learn that Pennsylvania is neck and neck with Michigan for 3rd place in growing Christmas trees after North Carolina and number 1 Oregon. I mean, there's a big display at the farm show every year. But 3 other commercial crops in the Keystone State did surprise me a bit. Pennsylvania is a big producer of lavender. In fact, Lavender Green Farm in Knox is one of the oldest lavender farms in the country. We also grow pawpaws for commercial harvest, which is tricky because Miss Pawpaw has never heard the word shelf life. You pick them, you eat them, and you don't wait around. Finally, we also grow a lot of kiwi berries. That's right, berry-sized versions of the hairy kiwi fruit thrive here, and get this, they're fuzzless. You can just wash them and pop them in your mouth. Kiwi Corners in Danville is not only certified organic, but in 2009, their kiwi berries were tested at the highest sugar level ever recorded in any kind of kiwi internationally. I gotta get hold of some of these little beauties. Now, the next episode, it's going to be my first Lancaster County episode, a profile of the lovely little town of Lidditz, featuring an old family friend who's brewing beer there. It's only coincidental that Stoll & Wolfe is also in Lidditz. And hey, the latest interview I recorded is so good, I decided to save it for the first holiday episode. Wait, what did I say? That's right! You've all been really good listeners, so you're going to get 2 holiday episodes this year. That's partly because Seen Through a Glass Day is always Thursday, but this year, the calendar lines up so that Thanksgiving and Christmas are both podcast drop days. And the Thursday in between them is opening day of the Mifflinburg Christkindl Market. That just screws everything up. No one wants to listen to me on a holiday. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to do some kind of Thanksgiving preparation episode on November 13th, which should be easy because it's going to be just the dogs and me at home. Kathy's going to Ireland for 2 weeks. We'll see what we can get up to. Then 2 weeks later, instead of dropping on Thanksgiving, when we'll all be in a food coma, we're going to drop the first holiday episode 2 days later on Small Business Saturday, November 29th. Small business is what we love here at Seen Through a Glass, right? So get out there and support your local businesses while listening to a podcast episode that will be stuffed with them, along with a preview of the Christkindl Market. Then 2 weeks later, on Thursday, December 11th, we'll have the second holiday episode, filled with holiday cooking and baking and some special interviews. You're going to be able to smell it right through the speaker. Then 2 weeks later, on the day after Christmas, we'll have, a Boxing Day episode or something. Maybe we'll record an unscripted, unedited episode at one of our favorite spots. Whatever it is, it's going to be relaxed, just like you'll be, I hope. Until then, thanks for listening. This is Lou Bryson on Seen Through a Glass from the smack dab center of the Keystone State.